Hello again, I am Alex aka Mont, and this is a follow-up video, so if you've not seen the first video you should pause this one and check the link in the description, and watch the first one. Last time we touched on a very simple sounding question, but with a very complex answer. As a matter of fact, there is no real correct answer, unless maybe you're Miyazaki, but the fun lies in the discussion. Who would win if the Slayer of Demons, Chosen Undead, Bearer of the Curse and Good Hunter fought? Who is the most powerful amongst them? Last time we covered lore and story power. Who was the most powerful from a story perspective? And I came to the conclusion that it was probably the Chosen Undead, but it was pretty damn close. This time, however, we're going to be covering it purely from a gameplay perspective, which immediately brings up several problems that we've got to jump into. Which game's rules apply here? For example, the Slayer of Demon has a mana bar, whereas the Chosen Undead and Bearer of the Curse have spellcasts. One might run faster than the other or have more iframes. What about Bearer of the Curse versus Chosen Undead? Do backstabs work like in Dark Souls 1 or Dark Souls 2? For the sake of this video, I'm going to assume that each character works as they do in their game. For example, the Good Hunter will be using blood vials to heal and will be unable to backstab without first landing a charged heavy attack. The Slayer of Demons will take reduced falling damage by raising their dexterity, and so forth. We'll also assume that each character is max level from their respective game, which is usually around level 700 or something like that. So, let's start with the Slayer of Demons.
Soul of the mind, key to life's ether. Soul of the lost, withdrawn from its vessel. Let strength be granted so the world might be mended.
Considering he was the first Souls character, he enjoys the unique position of benefiting from a lack of balance, and boy is there some crazy stuff you can do in Demon Souls. For example, because Demon Souls has a mana bar, that means you can effectively continue to use magic as long as you have mana. And considering you can stock like 99 items that restore mana, you're good there. Oh, and you can regenerate mana with other items. The Slayer of Demons also lacks Estus, instead being able to stock hundreds of healing grass items. We're not going to look at all his abilities, but let's look at some of his most powerful items and spells, shall we? At least those that I am aware of, as I am not as experienced with Demon Souls as I am the other games. First up, the Morion Blade. A very popular weapon. It increases your damage by something like 60%, but only when you are under 30% health, kind of like how the Red Tear Stone Ring works in Dark Souls, Hyper Mode. However, it also stacks with the Clever Rat Ring, which is essentially the Red Tear Stone, giving you 140% bonus damage. But perhaps better for these circumstances would be the Blue Blood Sword. It requires fairly high stats to be effective, but considering this character is max level, they'll be pushing out some huge damage with it, and it can also be enchanted. The Slayer of Demons also has access to the Dark Silver Shield, which I believe blocks all physical damage, all magical damage, and 70% of fire damage, which makes it a very powerful bulwark against most damage types. But that presents another problem, you might be thinking. Bloodborne doesn't strictly operate in the same way as Demon Souls. Demon Souls lacks lightning damage and blood damage. So for the sake of this, do we consider those magical damage, or new damage types that the Slayer of Demons has no defense against? I am inclined to consider them simply as magical damage, because in my opinion there is generally just magic damage and physical damage, but of course that does give the Slayer of Demons an advantage. So in the end it's up to you. On the subject of magic, however, the Slayer of Demons has some killer spells at his disposal. Curse Weapon is a buff that increases your weapon damage by 50%, but lowers your health restoration, whereas Soul Arrow and their like work much like the Dark Souls counterparts. One unique thing that the Slayer of Demons enjoys though, due to the lack of balancing in this earlier title, is an insane amount of magical defense. Namely, we have Warding, or Total Protection, which reduces physical damage taken by an insane 70%, and whilst it can't be used at the same time, the Slayer of Demons also has Second Chance, or One-Time Revival, which, as its name implies, brings you back to life when you die. Dark Souls 2 had a variation of this spell, but it was nowhere near as powerful. Once you die, you can regenerate your mana and cast it again, in a theoretical infinite loop. Another side of defense is evasion. and the Slayer of Demon enjoys fast rolling beneath 50% weight or equip burden, an advantage over the Chosen Undead. And whilst I'm not certain about iframes and the like, I imagine they are similar. The Slayer of Demons also can be quite the stealthy one. He enjoys a decent selection of items that make him much harder to detect. Unfortunately, I'm not entirely sure how these work in PvP, as my Demon Souls PvP experience is extremely limited. Perhaps somebody with lots of experience can leave a comment on that topic down below. Outside of all this, the Slayer of Demons also enjoys passive health and mana regeneration, if he has certain items equipped. All in all, he's quite the mountain to topple, but dealing with a near impossible challenge is the speciality of all these fighters in the end, so let's move on.
So it was you. I shall destroy you, as fate has commanded me, foolish pawn of Darkstalker Karth, and fiendish Dark Lord.
To the Chosen Undead. He enjoys many of the same abilities as the Slayer of Demons, but some unique additions would be a new lightning element, sunlight spears and so forth. The Chosen Undead also enjoys some crazy weapons, such as a buffed Painting Guardian sword, which can shred anything up, unless they parry. Speaking of which, how on earth do we work that out? A good player will parry everything, so this would just end up being a parry spam festival. In the end, we can only really consider potential after all. And although the Chosen Undead has limited casting, some of the spells at his disposal are pretty damn powerful. Dark Bead and Pursuers, for example. Those are strictly from an offensive consideration, but the Chosen Undead also has the incredibly game-changing Tranquil Walk of Peace ability that renders others unable to dodge. Think about that for a second. In which game would being unable to dodge be a complete showstopper? In Demon Souls, you can block. In Dark Souls 1 and 2, you can block. But in Bloodborne, all you have is your evasion, unless we're counting the wooden shield. Indeed, due to the way the game is played and based so heavily on evasion, I think the good hunter would find it near impossible to defeat the Chosen Undead. Bullets can be blocked, physical attacks can be blocked, and the Chosen Undead even has a way to render the good hunter nearly immobile. That is, assuming he gets close enough and traps him in the aura. The good hunter is extremely fast and able to push out a lot of damage, but that doesn't do him much good if the Chosen Undead is simply able to poise tank through it, or block with Karmic Justice activated. Karmic Justice is a spell that detonates a powerful area of effect explosion upon the caster receiving several hits in quick succession. It doesn't matter how much damage it is, only how many. So if you have a Chosen Undead blocking with, say, a shield that blocks 90% damage, and then a good hunter spamming away at him, let's face it, the good hunter does have to spam a lot of his weapons most of the time, you're going to end up with an exploded hunter one way or the other. The Chosen Undead also has the Dragon Slayer Spear, a spear with huge range, split damage values that is very good for poking. It might not eradicate equipment like, say, the Scraping Spear, but it is very effective all the same, especially combined with a Leo Ring. Likewise with the Halberd. Those can be some of the most devastating weapons if you're relying on counter pokes. There's also the Zweihander, an incredibly powerful weapon in the right hands, considering that dead angles can make it remarkably hard to parry. Overall, the Chosen Undead is a lot like the Slayer of Demons. One big advantage I can think of though, would be his ability to parry, for which he seems to enjoy a larger selection of parry-friendly shields. And then he also has poise. The best poise mechanics out of any of the characters. At least when it comes to being powerful, that is. From a gameplay perspective, maybe poise was a bit too powerful. Or so it seems to me. But speaking of no startup parries...
The curse is a part of life itself. No one will ever be rid of it. And so there is only one choice. To await a worthy monarch.
We have the Bearer of the Curse. And of the bunch, I imagine this is the one who has changed the most. Dark Souls 2 has received the most amount of balance changes over the span of its life, as far as I'm aware. Oh, the Chosen Undead had his Laser Shield Death Blast, and the Bearer of the Curse has had his Soul Geyser, Double Avalanche, Santia Spear, Chaos Blade, Dark Chaos Blade, and Chaos Blade. But some things have remained consistently true and powerful, whereas others have sprung into the limelight as the game matured. The Rob Flynn build, for example, combining the Ring of Blades and Flynn's Ring to achieve very high physical damage modifiers, but I think it would be fair to say that the majority of Dark Souls 2's strongest and most popular builds have involved infused weapons with elemental buffs, such as the Dark Chaos Blade buffed with Resonant Weapon. Whilst the Bearer of the Curse lacks poise to the extent that the Chosen Undead has it, he does have some powerful items and spells with strong gimmick value that rival those of the Slayer of Demons. Example, the old Sun Ring and Thorn Rings could be used to reflect huge amounts of damage on anyone foolish enough to strike you, at least until they got nerfed, whilst other rings could be used to stack large amounts of defense, increase cast speed, or even, in the case of Dower's Ring of Protection, render you entirely invincible as long as you're hit from behind. Of course, that particular ring was hit with the nerf stick, understandably, but even now it reduces damage from behind by a considerable amount. That's on top of having variations of Second Chance, Tranquil Walk of Peace, and many spells. In fact, the Bearer of the Curse has the largest arsenal at his disposal, dozens of weapons, rings, and spells to choose from. The sheer variety here means that the Bearer of the Curse is a good contender for the crown. See what I did there? Because of the Lost Crowns trilogy? Yeah, anyway.
Ah, welcome home, good hunter. I must have drifted off. What is it you desire?
Finally, we have the Good Hunter. I haven't even seen the comments of the first video by time of writing, but I'm sure that the Good Hunter is going to be by far the most divisive character here. Some people will be convinced that he's the strongest, others probably think he is the weakest. He's all about evading blows and trading blows with his vampiric qualities. It's true that he's by far the fastest of these characters, able to dodge many times in quick succession and deliver devastating combos and chained attacks one after the other. That, and he has a variety of guns at his disposal. The fact that he does not wear armor isn't too much of an issue either. Armor won't save the others, it just might allow them to take a few more hits. But the problems here stem from how speed is essentially the Good Hunter's main power. It is his greatest asset and his greatest weakness. The others are all extremely well rounded, but the Good Hunter has nothing but speed going for him, ultimately. He has the smallest arsenal of weapons, no real magic, no real shields, and is unable to backstab without landing a charged attack first. So from a gameplay perspective, it's conceivable that any of the others could simply circle, strafe and backstab fish. Which is a ridiculous tactic, I'll admit, but it's stupidly effective, and if you play online, that's probably what you're going to run into most of the time. Still, we can't dismiss the Good Hunter from that alone. Whilst his lack of any real shields is a problem, he has one huge advantage, the ability to, essentially, parry from range. Whilst the others have to be within striking range, the Hunter can parry from yards away, and unlike any of the others, he can essentially parry heals. A low adaptability Bearer of the Curse would never be able to get a single heal off against a worthy Good Hunter. The Good Hunter really lacks any way to actually damage the others in the first place, as they can all block like all of his attacks, and the Good Hunter doesn't really even have Guard Crush, because his game is not designed around needing it. Although the Hunter was able to kick in an early demo of Bloodborne. So outside of magical items and attacks, the Hunter would just really struggle to put the hurt on the others, the way I see it. The Chosen Undead has the poise to tank the attacks, whereas the Slayer of Demons and the Bearer of the Curse are able to block. Now granted, both of those might struggle to actually hit the Hunter. Chosen Undead is perhaps a perfect counter for him though, with Tranquil Walk of Peace. Poise and a shield just trump the Bloodborne mechanics from my point of view. So, all that considered, who is the strongest, in my opinion? The Slayer of Demons. I think this largely comes down to a matter of game balance, and you can really see it as the games progress. The Slayer of Demons has access to so many, frankly broken abilities, whereas the Good Hunter does not, and I feel like the Good Hunter would lose most of these matchups, but only because his game is designed in a very different way. That is of course at max level. If we go at starting level, or even up to around level 50, I think the Good Hunter would beat most of the others. But one problem is how the power levels work in these games. Whilst most of the others start off rather weak and then become obscenely powerful by max level, the Good Hunter's power hits diminishing returns very quickly, as far as I'm concerned. They start off powerful, they reach their peak, and then they just sort of cruise along. But that's just the nature of the game, you know. And in the end, it's impossible to really know the answer, as we're talking about different games with different mechanics and rules. And it just so happens that shields that block all incoming damage are pretty damn useful. But hey, That's what I think. Close call, but I think the Slayer of Demons and Bearer of the Curse generally would end up winning due to the sheer amount of gimmicks, spells and items they have at their disposal. What do you think though? Let me know in the comments, and remember this is of course 100% speculation, just as with the other video, and in the end it doesn't really matter, because we all know that in the end, Broly would win, because his power is maximum.